Chapter 1 of The White Linen Nurse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The White Linen Nurse by Eleanor Hallowell Abbott. Chapter 1. The white linen nurse was so tired that her noble expression ached. Incidentally, her head ached, and her shoulders ached, and her lungs ached, and the ankle bones of both feet ached quite excruciatingly. But nothing of her felt permanently incapacitated except her noble expression. Like a strip of lip-colored lead, suspended from her poor little nose by two tugging wire-gray wrinkles, her persistently conscientious sick-room smile seemed to be whanging aimlessly against her front teeth. The sensation certainly was very unpleasant. Looking back thus on the three spine-curving, chest-cramping, foot-twinging, ether-scented years of her hospital training, it dawned on the white linen nurse very suddenly that nothing of her ever had felt permanently incapacitated except her noble expression. Impulsively she sprang for the prim white mirror that capped her prim white bureau, and stood staring up into her own entrancing, bright-colored Nova Scotian reflection with tense and unwonted interest. Except for the unmistakable smirk which fatigue had clawed into her plastic young mouth lines, there was certainly nothing special the matter with what she saw. "Perfectly good face," she attested judicially, with no more than common courtesy to her progenitors. "Perfectly good and tidy-looking face. If only," her breath caught a trifle. "If only it didn't look so disgustingly noble and hygienic and dollish." All along the back of her neck little sharp prickly pains began suddenly to sting and burn. "Silly, simpering, pink and white puppet," she scolded squintingly. "I'll teach you how to look like a real girl." Very threateningly she raised herself to her tiptoes and thrust her glowing corporeal face right up into the molten, elusive quicksilver face in the mirror. Pink for pink, blue for blue, gold for gold, dollish smirk for dollish smirk, the mirror mocked her seething inner fretfulness. "Why, darn you!" she gasped. "Why, darn you! Why, you looked more human than that when you left the Annapolis Valley 3 years ago. There were at least tears in your face then, and cinders, and your mother's best advice, and the worry about the mortgage, and the blush of Joe Hazelton's kiss." Furtively, with the tip of her index finger, she started to search her imperturbable pink cheek for the spot where Joe Hazelton's kiss had formerly flamed. "My hands are all right, anyway," she acknowledged with infinite relief. Triumphantly she raised both strong, stub-fingered, exaggeratedly executive hands to the level of her childish blue eyes and stood surveying the mirrored effect with ineffable satisfaction. "Why, my hands are dandy!" she gloated. "Why, they're perfectly dandy! Why, they're wonderful! Why, they're—" Then suddenly and fearfully she gave a shrill little scream. "But they don't go with my silly doll face!" she cried. "Why, they don't! They don't! They go with the senior surgeon's scowling Heidelberg eyes! They go with the senior surgeon's grim gray jaw! They go with the— Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?" Dizzily, with her stubby fingertips prodded deep into every jaded facial muscle that she could compass, she staggered towards the air, and dropping down into the first friendly chair that bumped against her knees, sat staring blankly out across the monotonous city roofs that flanked her open window, trying very, very hard, for the first time in her life, to consider the general phenomenon of being a trained nurse. All around and about her, inexorable as anesthesia, horrid as the hush of tomb or public library, lurked the painful, unmistakable sense of institutional restraint. Mournfully to her ear from some remote kitcheny region of pots and pans a browsing spoon tinkled forth from time to time with soft muffled resonance. Up and down every clammy white corridor innumerable young feet, born to prance and stamp, were creeping stealthily to and fro in rubber-heeled whispers. Along the sombre fire escape just below her window-sill, like a covey of snubbed doves, 6 or 8 of her classmates were cooing and crooning together with excessive caution concerning the eminent graduation exercises that were to take place at 8 o'clock that very evening. Beyond her dreariest ken of muffled voices, beyond her dingiest vista of slate and brick, on a far faint hillside, a far faint streak of April green went roaming jocundly skyward. Altogether sluggishly, as though her nostrils were plugged with warm velvet, the smell of spring and ether and scorched mutton chops filtered in and out, in and out, in and out of her abnormally jaded senses. Taken all in all, it was not a propitious afternoon for any girl as tired and as pretty as the white linen nurse to be considering the general phenomenon of anything except April. In the real country, they tell me, where the young spring runs wild and bears a nymph through every dull brown wood and hay-gray meadow, the blasé farmer lad will not even lift his eyes from the plough to watch the pinkness of her passing. But here, in the prudish, brick-minded city, where the young spring at her friskiest is nothing more audacious than a sweltering, winter-swathed madcap who has impishly essayed some fine morning to tiptoe down street in her soft, sleazily green silk-stockinged feet, the whole hobnailed population reels back aghast and a grin before the most innocent flash of the rogue's green-veiled toes. And then, suddenly snatching off its own cumbersome winter foot-habits, goes chasing madly after her in its own prankish, vari-colored socks. Now the white linen nurse's socks were black, and cotton at that, a combination incontestably sedate. And the white linen nurse had waded barefoot through too many posed country pastures to experience any ordinary city thrill over the sight of a single blade of grass pushing scarily through a crack in the pavement, or puny Concord-strangled maple tree flushing wanly to the smoky sky. Indeed, for 3 hustling, square-toed, rubber-heeled city years, the white linen nurse had never even stopped to notice whether the season was flavored with frost or thunder. But now, inexplainably, just at the end of it all, sitting innocently there at her own prim little bedroom window, staring innocently out across indomitable roof-tops, with the crackle of glory and diplomas already ringing in her ears, she heard, instead, for the first time in her life, the gaily daredevil voice of the spring, a hoydenish challenge flung back at her, leaf-green from the crest of a winter-scarred hill. "Hello, white linen nurse!" cried the saucy city spring. "Hello, white linen nurse! Take off your homely starched collar, or your silly candy-box cap, or any other thing that feels maddeningly artificial, and come out, and be very wild." Like a puppy-dog cocking its head towards some strange unfamiliar sound, the white linen nurse cocked her head towards the lure of the green-crested hill. Still wrestling conscientiously with the general phenomenon of being a trained nurse, she found her collar suddenly very tight, the tiny cap inexpressibly heavy and vexatious. Timidly she removed the collar, and found that the removal did not rest her in the slightest. Equally timidly she removed the cap, and found that even that removal did not rest her in the slightest. Then very, very slowly, but very, very permeatingly and completely, it dawned on the white linen nurse that never while eyes were blue and her hair gold and lips red Would she ever find rest again?